Top Gun. What an amazing movie out of the 80s, depicting naval aviation, some of the best cinematics I think I've really ever seen, just as far as the way that this movie was shot. Fantastic movie. Best enjoyed with a vodka Red Bull, I think is the only drink that I can think of that is appropriate with its caffeinated alcohol. Just really sets you in the mood for kind of the action that's in this movie. So you guys are probably wondering, what in the jammed catapult does Top Gun have to do with Supreme Commander? No, it's not because the Cyclone has a vague resemblance to the F-14, although as I was making this video, I realized that is actually the case. It does kind of look like the F-14 with its wings swept back. It is because I was thinking about the mentality and what kind of goals newer players should be looking to put their opponents, what kind of positions newer players should be looking to put their opponents in order to win ladder matches. What mentality should you approach a ladder match with? That's what we'll talk about here at the beginning of the video, and then we'll put some concrete steps to it at the end of the video. Top Gun, particular line that I have in mind, espouses the actual mentality that I think that you should be approaching and the goal that you should be working towards in a ladder match. Now, it's a line that Iceman says. Let's go back. We'll look at that particular clip one more time.
Firing, break right! Mustang, this is Voodoo 1. We are totally defensive. Launch the alert fighters.
I am not military or ex-military, but according to my grandpa, who is ex-military, the words that Iceman says here, whenever he says, I am totally defensive, this means that Iceman is putting all of his effort in the dogfight just to stay alive. He's not putting any effort into evening the odds. He's not able to put or expend any effort into making progress or get a firing solution on one of the enemies. It is purely just keeping him and his co-pilot alive. Hollywood takes a lot of creative liberties in some of the terms that they use, according to my grandpa, but totally defensive in this situation, that's what it means. Now, this illustrates the mentality that I think that ladder players should have whenever they are playing the ladder. You need to put your opponent into a position where they are totally defensive. So we've talked about the hidden resources within Supreme Commander or any real-time strategy game, and one of those resources is actions per minute. Every player has a finite number of actions that they can take. If you are forcing your opponent to expend all of their actions per minute, all of their energy and all of their focus on just regaining territory or repairing damage that you've already done, you will eventually wear them down and you will eventually win the game. So this is going to be the first video in hopefully a series of videos. I've gone back and forth and remade this series like 4 times now. So this is the last time. This is the last time I'm remaking this video for the last time. To help newer players on the ladder see A, that the ladder is really not as intimidating as some people think, and B, at least have a relatively coherent game plan going into their first ladder match so that they can have some fun. They have a blueprint that they can adapt, they can build on as they get better, play different maps, etc. So how do we do this? Now, there are a lot of ways that you can force your opponent into this kind of situation. And much better players than me that watch my videos have commented several of those in the comments section. Things like making sure factories are active, reclaiming and looking at reclaim among the maps as far as formulating your plan, not chasing the enemy's comm around the map, out spamming by building more factories, out ecoing, etc. There's a lot of ways that you can, or a lot of ways and steps that you can take in order to put your opponent into the totally defensive situation. But I believe all of these things, even though they are fantastic goals, are simply means to an end. And that a combination of these various steps and these various tactics will end up putting your opponent into that position. So this is the mentality that I approach the ladder whenever I am looking to play games. This fits my play style. I'm not sure if other people playing the ladder approach it with a different mentality or different play styles, but this is how I approach it, and it's worked out pretty well for me so far. I just cracked actually 1,000 on the ladder, so I think I'm like 1,007. So I'm never gonna play ladder again because I never ever want to go back under 1,000 on the ladder. But I believe that these are all things that you can do to accomplish the overall objective, which is eliminate the enemy commander. So let's talk about some tangible steps, because we can talk conception, concepts, mentalities, abstracts all day long. We can have a whole lot of fun talking abstracts. We can have a whole lot of fun talking movies, etc. So the first thing you have to do is pick your faction. Each faction has unique properties, even though they all appear to be relatively similar to a newer player. They all have land factories, they all have air factories, they all have mobile artillery, they all have mobile anti-aircraft, etc. But there are subtle differences as far as how the factions play, and you would want to be using these factions to their strengths and weaknesses. Now, there are a lot of players that are, again, better than me that have done deep dives into each one of the factions. I will summarize some of the factions here, or I will do a broad summary of the 4 factions here. And as you figure out which one you like to play, I would recommend going and watching. Brinko Insanity has a couple of faction deep dives, even though they're a little bit older. Same with Heaven and a couple of other players. So let's start alphabetical order. Aeon. So the Aeon is the most micro-intensive faction. I would argue it has the highest skill ceiling, but it also has the highest potential for decimating your opponent. And really all of this is contained in the fact that the Aurora has longer range, but at the cost of significantly less armor, coming in at 140 HP, I believe, at the time of filming. This means that for newer players, this is going to be a little bit more difficult for you to maintain control over. Not saying it's impossible, but you will have to be microing your Auroras and your units to keep them out of harm's way. This also necessitates radar because your Aurora's range is going to be longer than their vision range. So, not one that I would recommend for your very first ladder match, but as you get a little bit more experienced, Aeon is definitely a very, very strong civilization. So let's move on to Cybran. Cybran is my favorite. The reason why is because it's really good for raiding. So the way that I like to put my opponent in this totally defensive situation is with Mantis and with raiding and taking out perimeter mass extraction points and trying to keep my opponent fighting on too many fronts at the same time, therefore causing his territory to slowly constrict, and then I end up winning the game. So Cybran lends itself very well to that particular playstyle. It's a very fast-paced playstyle. Games are usually over under 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes for me. As you can see on a lot of my ladder matches, it's pretty rare that I have a game that goes longer than 20 minutes. Moving on to the Seraphim. This faction has very, very strong T1 mobile artillery. Zuis can float. They also pack an insanely high punch. They do good damage to buildings. Zuis are really viable at all segments of the game, even whenever Thams and Selens, other units at the T1 phase have kind of fallen off a little bit just because they can float, they can go across water, and they do have a really high damage potential. So maps like Point of Reach, the Zui is going to be a pretty effective tool really at all times in the game, which is why if you see on Guile's Epic cast, if they're Seraphim players, one of the things that they will do if they lose their particular oceans on Setins is they will start spamming T1 factories and spamming Zuis because they float, they do a hell of a lot of damage, and they can actually, combat Navy. So, Seraphim, last one, UEF. These guys generally have a little bit more tanky units at T1. The UEF is pretty good at just about everything. They don't really shine, I think, at a particular thing, but I think that they have very solid stages all through the game. Maybe their T3 phase is probably their strongest phase with the Percivals, but they have a solid T1 phase and a solid T2 phase. There's nothing weak about any of those phases. So, you pick a faction, great. Next, build orders. So now at the beginning of the game, you're going to need to start building things. You gate in with your commander. You have a finite number of resources, and you need to figure out a way to make those resources turn into more resources as quickly as possible so you can build units and put your opponent into a totally defensive position. So I'm going to break this down. I'll throw a build order on the screen. This is going to be a sample one from one of my ladder matches for you to follow along. But by and large, this is a template and this is a blueprint. It's something that you should adapt as you become a better player, as you learn different maps, but this is a good one to get you started. So for the comm, first off, you gate in. First thing you need to do is build a land factory. If possible, build it adjacent to a mass extraction point. This is going to save you a lot of mass in the long run because this factory is going to be the one that is producing a lot of engineers and will be running pretty much constantly. So it will save you quite a bit of mass. Then you build 2 power generators with adjacency again. We've talked a lot about on this channel how adjacency can actually impact overall unit production with similar resource amounts, and it is a lot. I'll link my video down in the description below where I take a very deep dive into exactly how much adjacency affects factories that are moving whenever you are controlling for a static energy amount. Next thing you're going to do is build your core mexes. Usually there's 3 or 4 of them around your initial commander. A couple maps that deviate from this a little bit, but by and large, there's going to be 3 or 4 mass extraction points that you're going to want to capture with your commander after your initial 2 P-gens. Then you're going to send your commander to assist the engineer that is building the hydro. We will get to where that engineer comes from in a second. I usually then build factories off of the hydro at this point. So I usually do, depending on the terrain, I try and do 3 land factories and an air factory off of the hydro. Then I send the commander to the front. Sending your commander to the front is very, 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 very important. Your commander is your strongest build or your strongest battle unit at the beginning of the game, equivalent to about 20 T1 tanks. And you will need him, especially if your opponent is using their commander to combat you. You will need your commander to balance the scales in your favor. Otherwise, your opponent will run over you. T1 units versus a commander plus T1 units. The T1 units will lose against the commander. So now let's move to the first factory. So you built this first factory with your commander, and you're going to start building 3 engineers. Here you get a choice. You can go for early harass if you want to start kind of dipping your toe into the water of harassing your opponents. This is something that helps a lot. If you have the actions per minute to expend on this, something that helps a lot at earlier or at lower ratings, because I've noticed that players don't necessarily know how to respond super well to early harass. So you build 3 engineers, and then if you want to harass, you can build a scout and a light assault bot, and you can build 2 scouts and 2 light assault bots as well if you would like. Depends on the type of map. If you don't want to go for early harass, I usually build 1 or 2 tanks to defend against potential early harass. Now, I don't know if this is ideal. This is what I do just because I hate getting harassed early, and Kappa, the guy I usually play 1v1 against, does a hell of a lot of early harass, and it annoys the shit out of me. So at that point, it's your choice as far as whether you want to go for early harass or whether you want to go for a more defensive and more defensive build. Okay, after this, I queue up 15 engineers from that initial factory. With these 15 engineers, you're going to alternate. One is going to be going to expanding mexes. The other is going to be going towards the next one is going to be building power, and the third one is going to be doing reclaim. The one that is building power should also be building additional factories as well, and I would alternate through that cycle. So engineer number 4 rolls off the belt. He goes for expanding mexes. Engineer number 5 builds power and additional factories. Engineer number 6 goes for reclaim. Repeats through that cycle. That's going to give you a good amount of reclaim coming in, as well as giving you additional factories to spam, to upgrade, etc. The reclaim engineers, if you're a newer player, I would recommend using attack move or patrol orders so that your engineers will reclaim without having to manually either use the hotkey or right clicking on the rocks. So after this, your additional factories need to be sending the troops to the front to assist your comm. My troop composition is 6 main battle units, 2 mobile artillery, 1 scout, and 1 mobile anti-aircraft. This is a pretty well-rounded unit composition. As you begin getting better, and really as I begin getting better too, I'm hoping to cut out certain things that I'm from this build order that are not necessarily appropriate. For instance, mobile anti-aircraft, if your opponent isn't going air, is a waste of mass. So that's something that I'm trying to get better at as well. But this is a good place to start. And it is, again, a blueprint that you can tweak later on down the line. So this is where you start. And at this point, it becomes feeling the game out. You have factories, you're producing units, you have a good initial build order that will produce a good amount of resources for you, and you have a game plan for your comp. So at this point, it becomes about experience, and we'll start wrapping up the video here with as many videos and tutorials that you watch. You're never going to watch enough tutorials to instantly be 1,000 rated player on your first game on the ladder. Maybe you do, maybe you can, maybe you're a genius. I couldn't do that. So for me, there was a lot of feeling things out. And my first ladder match was bad. My second one was a little bit better. My third one was a little bit better after that. And this is whenever you take this kind of blueprint, you can then apply it to the experience that you gather from these matches and begin to tweak this blueprint to fit your playstyle a little bit more appropriately. So this video was mostly designed for newer players. If you are a better player, I would love to hear your feedback on both the mentality that I use to approach, as well as the build order that I use initially. Like I said, I know this build order isn't perfect, but it's a good blanket statement. So not looking for an ideal build order, but I'm looking to give newer players a blueprint that will work on pretty much any map that they gate into. But I would love to get some feedback from this tutorial, and I will probably incorporate this feedback into later tutorials. In this, we really only covered the T1 phase. Videos in the future will be covering T2, T3 experimental phases. I don't think that I am 100% qualified yet to even make a tutorial that is halfway decent on those things yet. So those videos will be coming as I become more experienced and I learn a little bit more about how T2 fits, how to use it appropriately, when to upgrade, etc. I truly hope that if you're a new player watching this video and you take this and apply it, I truly hope that you run into me on the ladder, and I really hope that you beat the shit out of me, because that will be an affirmation that this tutorial got you off to a good start, and B, it means that the community is getting bigger. It means that people are, finding a love for this game like I do. I built out this channel. I've said this a lot, but I built out this channel to try and make this game more accessible to newer players, because it has such a steep learning curve. And these tutorials are geared towards hopefully making things, the tutorials and the science videos are hopefully geared towards making kind of a mountain of information a little bit more digestible for newer players. So I really hope that this helps you guys out. I really hope that you use this tutorial, it works for you, and I hope that you beat the shit out of me sometime on the ladder. With that, I will go ahead and stop rambling. I really appreciate you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.